GoDaddy is our sponsor for our coverage from OpenStack in Barcelona. Our theme for the conference, diversity and inclusion in the OpenStack ecosystem. Learn more about GoDaddy's diversity efforts at godaddy.com. Hey, it's Alex Williams with the New Stack here at OpenStack Barcelona with Job Jackson, co-host for the show. Hey, Job.
Good morning, Alex.
And here also with our guest today, Heather Kirksey, Executive Director of OPNFV. Hey, Heather.
Hi, how are y'all doing?
Very, very well. So, Job, you were mentioning this demo that Heather did earlier.
Oh, this morning for the opening keynote of the OpenStack Summit in Barcelona, the failover demo that was done with the mobile phone call. That was amazing. You were on one half of a phone call. The other half was being conducted on stage with the 5G equipment right on stage. Well, could you explain how this demo, what happened in this demo?
Yeah. So as you said, there was a 5G sort of actual piece of network core equipment on stage, and a private mobile network had been set up, and we did a phone call on stage, and first. Sort of using sort of older versions of OpenStack, Mark Collier pulled out the cables and the call dropped, obviously.
Sure, yeah.
And then they showed sort of the newer Newton version of OpenStack that had we call our Doctor project sort of changes. So within OPNFV, we had a project called Doctor that was looking specifically at fault detection and fault remediation, and they sort of looked at ways to get fault information faster so that failover could happen faster, because in something like a mobile network, failover is really important so you don't drop calls. Think about like being on a 911 call. You don't want your call to be dropped, right?
Right, yeah.
So they worked with OpenStack over the course of several releases, got a bunch of changes into Nova, Neutron, AODH, Ceilometer, etc. And so they sort of showed this morning kind of like current state-of-the-art OpenStack that when Mark Collier started cutting the cables...
Actually physically cutting the cables, yes.
Physically cutting the cables is a little nerve-wracking to be part of a live demo where cables are being cut. But he physically cut the cables, and because of this faster detection of faults and it makes failover happen faster, the call did not drop.
How does that work?
The cables were happening.
How does that work? How does that failover detection happen so quickly?
So various updates to sort of the Nova, Neutron APIs, and I think some of the notification architecture, so that sort of the state is reported more quickly. And if you want more details on that, I'm going to sort of get a developer involved with you.
We want to dive into how telecom is using OpenStack and NFV, but first I wanted to check. So this failover, that is available for all users of OpenStack for any sort of failover need.
As of Newton, all of the sort of blueprints and patches that they wanted to have incorporated to do that have been incorporated.
Nice.
Yeah, so it's not like there's a telco flavor of NFV. This is available for any user of Newton. So any other use cases that kind of might want that type of failover, like, I don't know, say financial services, high-speed trading or something like that, it's there for everyone.
So tell us about NFV and help us understand NFV and why is it becoming increasingly relevant to OpenStack?
Yeah. So NFV is basically a transformation of the global communications networks. So just sort of over the course of time, as you've had mobile networking coming in and residential broadband and different speeds and different eras of mobile networking and different capabilities, as things like deep packet inspection and firewalls and all sorts of new things have come in. The operators' networks have basically just ended up being kind of hodgepodges of so many pieces of proprietary, vertically integrated equipment that sort of serve particular purposes. And what that means is it's really hard to provision new services, so it's hard for the operators to be agile. It's hard for them to fail without a great deal of risk. because you have to go and touch all of the CLI of every single sort of piece of equipment out there to sort of roll a new service. Sometimes you might have to go out and forklift upgrade everything.
Right.
And so the management of it is hard. It's hard to roll new services, and it's and it's constrained with capacity. Like if you want to add dynamic capacity, that's just hard to do because the pieces of equipment are fixed where they are. And so the operators are really wanting to become more dynamic and more agile, so they're looking to migrate from these proprietary network elements, all of which have some acronym as their name.
Right.
Like the one you saw this morning, that's called an EPC, Evolved Packet Core. But move from that to just sort of taking most of that functionality and turn it into dynamic cloud applications. So the network itself becomes a cloud application. And so that's kind of what they're doing. So that network services kind of become dynamic, elastic cloud apps.
So, but NFV, which stands for Network Functions Virtualization, that in itself, I take it as only a specification. Where does OPNFV come in?
Yeah, so Network Functions Virtualization, mouthful like many telecom terms.
Tell me about
it. Refers to that sort of taking of things that used to live in hardware and virtualizing them into software. So OPNFV as an organization, what we do is we have sort of a virtuous circle where we integrate various components that are necessary for an end-to-end NFV platform. So things like OpenStack plus an SDN controller, plus some sort of data or forwarding plane capability like VPP or OVS, various acceleration technologies, getting a little bit probably kind of deep into the stack there. But so we compose an end-to-end platform, and then we put applications on there that sort of present that network capability, let's say like VPN capabilities and things like that. And so we will deploy those onto various infrastructures, do a lot of end-to-end testing, sort of see what falls out. So we'll get bugs, sort of that we might find from that end-to-end testing, or like you saw this morning with the Doctor project, we might have a feature in mind that we do top-down analysis, and we take that into all the upstream communities. So we're not looking to sort of make a telco-specific version of OpenStack, but we're looking to, from an NFV and networking perspective, work with OpenStack to both deploy in an integrated perspective with some of the other pieces necessary for OPNFV, and then take feedback back to OpenStack, like the Doctor project did.
Excellent. It sounds like from some of our earlier coverage that the telecoms are really ready for this to happen. They are. I guess they're kind of fed up of building their own proprietary solutions.
Yeah, no, they definitely are. OpenStack is really important to them. And sort of like the NFV transformation itself, all of a sudden they're looking at this software stack. It's also sort of propelled them to start really thinking about more open sort of ways of innovating as well, which is taking them to the open source world. So OPNFV is an open source organization. We're sort of systems integration as an open source project.
Sure, yeah.
But it's also taking them to OpenStack. They're looking at various open source container technologies, open source SDN controllers, software-defined networking. So there's a lot of change, both in sort of software and more open ways of collaborating and innovating in the telecom market.
So tell us about why this is increasingly relevant, and I'm also curious about the drawbacks to NFV. What are some of the the trade-offs that you have to make with NFV?
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like one of the trade-offs is like it is virtualized, right? And that has its own drawbacks.
Yeah, from a trade-off perspective, I think there are a couple things. First, said it's new.
Yeah.
From a cultural and skill set perspective, sort of really deep software knowledge as opposed to really deep
hardware.
Network element, knowledge is a new skill that a lot of folks are, on both the vendor and the end user side are having to build up. It's a different way of thinking about network design. You'll still see sometimes people, they'll start thinking about it and they'll have sort of a box mentality, when they first start sort of an architectural diagram instead of what might look more like a software stack, So there's a lot of learning, and in some ways that's a drawback. The other thing is, a lot of those proprietary elements, because they were so integrated to do one job very, very well and at very, very high performance and at 5 nines, that was what it was designed for. And moving into sort of software, there's just different challenges, of like how to think about failover differently. Things like performance and acceleration are definitely, big. If you think about this being a network service, you think about how much traffic gets pushed through a router on the public internet at any given time, right? That's what they're having to replicate in sort of applications built with OpenStack, in a data center, as opposed to sort of, a router that was designed exactly for that purpose and could be very finely tuned exactly for that.
Well, the old school engineering thought is that you really needed to have the configurations, I guess, based right on the hardware itself.
Right.
But that's, and OPNFV sounds like there's some layers there, but it doesn't really seem to hamper latency that much, I guess.
Yeah, amongst some of the things that are in the NFV ecosystem are technologies like DPDK, or some things related to in a project called FT.io they're around forwarding plane and data plane, getting that going, really fast, and some really smart thinking around some of those capabilities.
Are there equivalents to NFV inside something like AWS?
I don't think AWS offers necessarily virtual networking services, but certainly it's not limited to telco.
Right.
Certainly groups like Facebook are really thinking about networking. They started the telecom infrastructure project because they're wanting to think about networking differently. Certainly Google, with all of their network data centers, they were sort of doing some of the early concepts and ideas around some of this NFV type stuff, because they were just around sort of wanting to connect their data centers and have that go more quickly and not be so dependent
on the networking environment.
And on proprietary hardware. That's, if you think about how the web scale companies go, they tend to be very white box, very generic. Facebook with the Open Compute project. So they also have been turning their attention, and certainly a lot of large enterprises too, that banks that have a lot of branch offices, and they've got all these VPNs that they manage, or frame, some of them still have frame relay connections to their branch offices, or lease lines or dedicated things. A lot of them are wanting to sort of clean up their networking as well and make it more simplified and more software based.
It also sounds from this morning that a number of telcos are very interested in the cloud hosting space.
Right.
And it sounds also like NFV would allow them to spin up these sorts of services.
Yeah. They're similar yet slightly different. One is sort of offering what had been their core service all along, which is network services, that virtualized in software, and the other is offering cloud services. But certainly they're intertwined with each other. Certainly the expertise, on one side, helps the other. And as they're offering more cloud services, networking lots of data centers together and dealing with all of that, and highly performant applications and stuff like that.
And so we talk a lot about software development at the DStack, and NFV is much more of a play for IT operations. Does it? How is it relevant to the everyday user out there? And more people are as everyday users are not just software developers, but they're also working in operations, right? So how is it relevant in that respect?
Yeah. So, can I have two answers to that question? One is there anyone out there who does not depend on the network for anything that they do?
Not us. No.
So to the extent that the network becomes more agile, more responsive, more performant, more dynamic to sort of needs, that's relevant to sort of everyone's kind of daily life at this juncture. But also kind of from a more developer-centric point of view, if you're wanting to develop maybe some more network-centric apps, instead of having to think about how does this integrate with a B&G and an IMS and an EPC and a AAA and all these back-end things. I said there are a lot of acronyms in telecom.
Right.
You can just write an app that can maybe just request network resources in a far more simple way from this kind of more cloud style network.
Nice.
And so it enables application developers to have a much easier way to interface with the network itself and with network services, which a lot of apps can be made better by that. If you think about
Right.
Video apps or things like that can communicate their needs and have a better, simpler, more dynamic way of doing that.
Go ahead.
Oh, terrific. Are there any implementations of the OPNFV stack that you can talk about, or where are you guys in terms of developing a finished?
Yeah, so we have done 3 releases so far. Our Colorado release came out last week, and so in that release we have a number of scenarios. We basically compose a platform with different components, because there are a lot of open source kind of components in some places in the stack out there, so we'll compose various flavors, and then we'll test kind of some of the features on top of that as well. So for example, you asked about the Doctor project, right? So that's now available in all of OpenStack, but we've also written some specific test cases that actually test fault management. You kind of not just that the software kind of gets up and running, but we can test some fault management use cases. So I think, so with Colorado, we really started to hit our stride from a maturity point of view, both from us as an organization, where we just hit our 2-year anniversary. Also with the maturity of the other components, like some of that fault management stuff that's now in OpenStack, some things like service function chaining and better VPN support that are in the SDN controllers as well as OpenStack. So the underlying components have gotten more mature, and then we've gotten more mature with our processes. So, I would expect some, vendors and service providers to start doing some real proofs of concept, kind of using some of these things now, especially around network services. You can definitely talk to some of the operators. Some of them are. AT&T is certainly very aggressive. China Mobile, they won the Super User Award this morning. They've been aggressive in sort of moving to NFV, and I think a lot of the early implementations tend to be proprietary because it was always ready, at the time. But I think the open source components are, really beginning to hit their stride, that they can start to be used.
How is this affecting the proprietary vendors? How are they reacting to this?
So in some ways, it's almost less about the proprietary vendors versus open source vendors, although certainly you're seeing traditional open source vendors kind of come into this world. We hadn't been there before, like SUSE and Red Hat and Canonical and Mirantis. But it's in some ways less about that and more about hardware vendors becoming software vendors and or systems integrators. Right. So in some ways, from a licensing and business model perspective, they're trying to figure some of that out. But I would say in some ways the more complicated transition for them is more of the thinking in terms of boxes that they sell or networks that they sell to thinking of integrating software and selling software that might run on white box hardware, OCP, or things like that. So to me, I think that's probably in some ways the bigger transition, because I think in some ways it's easy to embrace open as you sort of go into that software world, especially because their legacy business is hardware. They're not like Microsoft was back in the day with a legacy proprietary software business. So in some ways it's challenging to do 2 transitions at once, but in some ways, from an innovator's dilemma perspective, if you're going software, why not go open software?
It seems like it's really hard for them, actually. I mean, you don't see many. I mean, you see software networking companies popping up. Yeah. But it seems very hard for the traditional hardware networking companies to make that transition.
I think it definitely is challenging. I also have seen companies moving with more agility and more sort of focus on that than I've seen large telecom companies react or act in a really long time.
Yeah, we've seen Cisco doing things.
Yeah, Ericsson, Huawei, Nokia.
Yeah.
I mean, these are all very large, some very old companies, and actually they have been moving far more quickly than I would have expected, honestly.
So what's up for OPNFV in 2017?
So let's see. Our next release is Danube. That should be coming up in the spring of 2017. Not quite 2017, but December 2016. We're having our next Plug Fest. So we're going to have another interop event. It's going to be co-located with sort of design kind of and hacking activity for the rest of the technical community. That's going to be at the University of New Hampshire Interop Lab. So that'll be exciting. Our summit's coming up in Beijing in June.
Nice.
So that's going to be our first summit in Asia. So we're excited about that. And just kind of more of the same. I mean, really at the end of the day, as an integration project, the more that we can help work with the upstream communities to get NFV use cases realized in code, get better integration amongst the upstream communities, and just continue to blow out the testing in our test lab infrastructure so that we get to exercise things more and more and more and give that feedback to the developers upstream more quickly, the more impact we'll have and the better all of us as an ecosystem will be.
Great. Well, Heather, thank you very much for taking some time to talk with us.
You're welcome. It was great. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thanks, Joe. GoDaddy is our sponsor for our coverage from OpenStack in Barcelona. Our theme for the conference, diversity and inclusion in the OpenStack ecosystem. Learn more about GoDaddy's diversity efforts at godaddy.com.